In this lesson, we're going to learn how to model objects with splines. Alright, so we've talked about using box modeling methods, and we've used non-smoothing techniques and smoothing techniques. Now what we want to do is just kind of show you a different way of getting objects in your scene. So let's go to our front view, and I'm going to hit F3. And I'm going to come in here, and we're going to create a med box using a spline. Now splines are found under the Create panel under Shapes, and you can see splines here, and you have several different splines that you can choose from. We're going to go ahead and choose a rectangle, and I'm just going to create one about a rough size of about 0.5 on our length, and our width will go to 0.8, and then a corner radius we can leave it at 0, or we could come in here and we could start to round out the corners of this rectangle, which is a pretty good idea. Alright, so now let's go ahead and right click and convert this object to editable spline, and this will allow us to access the vertices of our spline object. Now we've already done most of the hard part here. We've created this shape here, and we've rounded off these corners, but I want to talk to you a little bit about tangent types whenever working with splines. If we select around a vertex, what you're going to notice if you right click, you're going to notice that we have this section that has these tangent types. We have Bezier corner, smooth, and reset tangents. So if I were to select all of these objects and right click and reset their tangents, they're going to go to something like Bezier or something like that, and they're going to go to this default width. Okay, if I right click and I go to corner, it's going to make all of these lines very straight. Okay, if I right click and I go to Bezier, we get kind of this odd look, but you'll notice that all of these handles are able to be moved. Now with these handles, with Bezier, you'll notice the handles move simultaneously, so I can't move this handle independently of this one. Now if I want to be able to do that, I need to right click and go to Bezier corner, which will allow me to move the handles independently. So let's go ahead and right click, and we're going to go to smooth, and you'll see that smooth really rounds everything out, and it doesn't allow us to reshape this. So what we have to do is come in and just kind of move the vertices on our own to get the shape that we're looking for. So let's right click and go to Bezier corner, and you'll see that it kind of gives us that shape that we were looking for. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and reset those tangents on all of these. So let's right click Bezier corner, let's reset those tangents, try to get that to be a little bit smoother. And now what I can do is I can come in and start to reshape this however I see fit. Now the shape that I was going for was what we had in the very beginning. So let's go ahead and learn how to reshape this the way that we had before. So with your move tool activated, you notice we have the X and Y handles on our move tool, and you'll notice right now that both the X and the Y are highlighted in yellow. That's going to allow me to move these handles in any direction that I want along the X and Y axes. Now if I click on the X axis, I can only move left to right in the X, but I cannot move up and down. Now if I want to move up and down, I need to activate the Y. That will allow me to move up and down, but not left to right in the X. So if I want to be able to move in all three directions, or both directions, excuse me, I need to select the X and the Y by clicking right here on this box. Now normally I like to go ahead and constrain these directions by hitting X, and that will lock those axes. So now I can come in and move these around freely without worrying about adjusting the handles in the wrong direction or changing my constraints. So let's go ahead and let's pull these up, and let's start to shape this out the way that we're looking, the way that we want for our line here. And you'll notice that we're getting a little bit of snapping here. So whenever the handles become very close in the threshold, the lines will pretty much snap to even. Okay, so we'll come in and we'll kind of round this out. Let's do the same thing for these handles right here. You'll see that that snaps into a straight line, and it's just kind of assuming that that's what you want. Okay, and those will snap, and we'll go ahead and we'll round out these corners, and I'm just going to pull these straight out in this direction. Same thing here. I'm going to take this handle, pull it straight out, and pull that straight down, so it kind of gives us that curve. right in here, and then across. And then this one, go ahead and pull that up, just like so. All right, so now that we've got that, we can come back and we've got our rectangular shape here. All right, so before we move on, I always like to kind of check my shape a little bit. So I'm going to grab a rectangle and just kind of create it inside of that. And then I'll adjust that corner radius and just kind of check my shape just to make sure that it's fairly close. And that is pretty good. So I'll go ahead and delete that out. So now that we have this spline, what do we do with it? Because it's not 3D. It doesn't render. It won't show up. It doesn't create 3D geometry. Now what we can do is we can use a modifier to create that geometry. Okay, or I can go to my modify panel and go to rendering and then tell it to enable in the viewport, which will give me some geometry. As you can see here, it kind of creates a cylinder around that edge. Okay, or I can enable in the renderer as well, and that will allow it to render. But that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So let's use a modifier called extrude. Okay, and this will give us 3D geometry on this object. It creates a plane out of that geometry. Now I can take the amount up, give it a little bit of thickness, like so. So let's do 0.1. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my move tool. Let's hit X to unconstrain that move tool, and let's pull that back up against the wall. All right. Now I want to go into edge mode again, so let's go to editable spline. Let's show end result, so that way it shows us the extrude modifier while we're working in the editable spline. And I want to be able to take this polygon that's just been created and inset that and create a box. Well, that's not really possible with using this spline. So I have to go about a different method. I could use this extrude and then convert it to editable poly, but that's going to create some issues. So what else do I have available to me? Well, what I could do is I can go ahead and get rid of that extrude, and I could use just a different modifier altogether. And another modifier that we could use to create geometry from 2D splines is called surface. Now surface works a little bit differently. We have to create multiple splines for this to work properly. So if I hold down Shift and drag this spline out in the Y, we'll create a copy. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull that out, give myself some thickness, and then I'm going to create another copy. So let's hold down Shift. Let's pull that out. And then I'm going to grab my scale tool and scale that in the Z and X. So what I'm trying to create is a med box that's going to extrude out to this point, then come down to here, and then I want to create kind of a rim. So I'm going to hold down Shift and scale in the Z and X, and that's going to create that flat side that I need for this med box. Okay, but I do want it to be rounded out just a little bit. Okay, so let's hold down Shift and scale straight down again. There we go. And then I'm going to grab my move tool, I'm going to hold Shift and pull that back. So you can kind of see what we're creating here. Now how do we get 3D geometry from this object that we've just created? Well, what we need to do is we need to connect all of the vertices together. But before we can do that, we have to attach all of these splines into one object. So let's select this spline here, and I'm going to use attach, and I'm going to pick the other splines in this object. Okay, so they've all turned white, they're all active, and they're all part of one object. Now I can use refine and create the shape that I'm looking for here. So I'm going to scroll down, and we should see refine. Now let's go to vertex mode, so we can hit 1 on the keyboard, and that's going to activate our refine tool. And let me find it here. There it is. And I want to connect all of these splines together. So I'm going to check connect, and then I'm going to choose linear, and that's just going to make it a little bit easier to draw. It's, instead of creating smooth lines, I want to create linear corner type lines. Okay, so let's hit refine, and while in vertex mode we should be able to see all of these vertices on this spline, but for some reason we're not able to see that. So what's happening here? Well, let's go ahead and hit Z. Let's right click on it, and let's right click and convert to editable spline again. Let's go to vertex mode, and there they've shown up. Okay, so now let's try that one more time. Connect, linear, refine. And all we're going to do at this point is we're going to click from each vertex. Let's check do not show this in meshes again, and let's do connect only. So that way it connects these edges. Okay, so we're going to go from here down to here, and then I'm going to right click, and you'll see that that creates a segment along all of those vertices that I've just created. Let's try this again. So I'm going to right click and go to refine connect, and it's going to save my settings, and then I'll go from here to here, just clicking on all of these vertices as I go. Right click, and that will create that new segment. Okay, we want to make sure that we are refining in order. So if you cut from or refine from this vertex and then go to this one, it's going to pose a little bit of an issue. Okay, so let's make sure that we're going in order on each line. Refine connect, and I'm going to go ahead and continue all of these all the way around. So just give me a moment. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and connect all of these, and we'll come back and we'll talk about how to get that geometry. Now you'll see that we've connected all of these edges together, and what we have now is a spline cage. And a spline cage is basically a set of splines that are all connected, and they all have quads. So you can see here that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 edges in this polygon here. Now, it still doesn't have geometry. So how do we get that geometry? Well, what we can do is we can go to our modifier list and use the surface modifier. Now, applying the surface modifier, you'll see that it gives us that nice round edge and smoothing very neatly, and then it's also created this 3D geometry using that spline cage. So here you can see how we can model smooth objects using splines. Now, if you want to make this even more smooth, you could take the steps up on the patch topology and smooth that out even more, or you can drop it down to make it a little bit less geometry, okay, a little bit less in resolution. So usually 5 or 6 is a good value for this. All right, so now that we've created this, how do we get the backside of this medicine box that we created here? Well, just like we did before, let's go back to editable spline. We can show end result, and if I go to vertex mode, I can refine connect on the inside. So let's right click, and actually let's come over here and let's set our settings up. So connect, linear, refine, and I'll go from this vertex across to here. We'll right click, and we'll do the same thing here. Refine connect from here across to here, and then right click. And that has now created that polygon along the back side. So again, if you show end result, you can work lower in the stack and still show the end result. Okay. All right, so we've created our med box using splines, and in our next lesson, we're going to talk about how we can use modifiers even more to model our geometry.